Hey guys, HadoukenDude here. This video is going to be a little different compared to my other videos, I guess. I just want to do a review regarding a video game series that I'm sure you guys know. And it's been something that has been on my mind for like the past few months. Shenmue. Why the hype? I've always wondered that myself ever since I heard about Shenmue a little over 10 years ago. Hear me out for a moment. Before I played Shenmue, I didn't hear about it until like 2007, when a friend of mine online told me about this game that supposedly was one of the greatest games ever made. It was released in '99. There were only like 2 installments made. Third one was in development hell, and people were eagerly awaiting the third one. Now, of course, I was intrigued about this game because from what I understood from the trailers, that you would be exploring this huge immersive world, right? Now, of course, initially I tried to play the Shenmue games, but of course the only way I could play them is through emulation. Now, hear me out for a moment. Not to get too sidetracked, but I made a video regarding console emulation. Feel free to check it out if you like, but long story short, emulation should be treated as a last resort. Please support the official release if it comes out on Steam, PlayStation 4, or Xbox One. Please support the official release. Now, moving on. Regarding emulation, initially I tried to play it on my previous computer, which was kind of underpowered. I used a Dell laptop, tried to see if I could play through emulation, and I couldn't really play it because it was just too laggy, and the emulator was just too buggy at the time. It wasn't until just recently where I decided to give it another chance, and I decided to actually play it. And fortunately, it actually runs a little better on my current computer, which is the Toshiba Satellite. Yeah, it has Windows 10 and all that. So I managed to actually play through it, and for the most part, I was able to play through the game like a good 80% of the time without any lag issues. And I was able to at least experience the gameplay, the story, the characters, the music. I mean, the game is just impressive. I can describe the game as overly ambitious, inspirational, truly ahead of its time. Because there's so much to do in the game that you get so immersed by it, over all the little details. Now, gameplay-wise, I should point out that you're mostly going through the city of Yokosuka, going through these little town areas of Dobuita, Yamanose, Sakuragaoka. I hope I'm pronouncing them right. But yeah, you're basically going around town. Initially, the game plays as a detective story because you're trying to go through from like one place to another, and you're like asking directions. You're asking for clues. You're asking for directions about going one place to another, and you're trying to figure out what's going on in this story. Now, the story itself, the basic premise is that Ryo's dad is murdered right before his eyes, and the main antagonist, Lan Di, kills him over a mirror. Then you find out that the mirror is somewhat like the plot device of the whole story. But it ends up being that it's not just one mirror, it's actually 2, but the second mirror is actually hidden somewhere. So the main plot point is Lan Di kills Ryo's dad just to obtain this magic mirror for some reason. It's never really explained like what's the purpose of these mirrors in the first game. Now, of course, the game initially can come off as a little slow-paced because you're just, walking around searching for clues, and you're just immersing yourself in the story. And speaking of immersiveness, the game itself is incredibly detailed. You can practically interact with everything. Be it, let's say, for example, take down a picture frame, open a cabinet, open a drawer. I mean, it's not like a huge world, but it's incredibly detailed, and that is impressive. Not only that, it also has a lot of mini games here and there. I mean, if you go to the arcade alone, you can actually, let's say, you can play a punching game, you can play darts, you can even play some old classics that were actually made by the main creator, Yu Suzuki. Of course, you can actually play Hang-On, you can play Space Harrier, just to name a few. I mean, those are the games that the creator previously made, and it was included there as an added bonus. But for some reason, it just doesn't work on the emulator, so yeah, it kind of crashes it. It has happened to me on occasion. But anyway, not to get too sidetracked, the main character, like I said, has to look for clues here and there regarding like where this murderer came from, what was his purpose, why did he take the mirror. Of course, then he later finds out like who was this person, what does it have to do? It has something to do with a Chinese cartel. Weird. Then you find out that this character that goes by the name of Ine-san. Ine-san is more like the mother figure, but she's like the caretaker of the family. Yeah, she's actually hiding a letter that the murderer left, and the letter is written in Chinese. So you have to find someone in this town in Japan who actually knows Chinese to actually help him decipher like what these things are supposed to mean. These characters are supposed to mean in Chinese. And of course, that serves as like more clues for the character to find out like where to go next. Of course, you also have to confront sailors and ask them for information. Yeah, I mean, it's a little silly thinking that an 18-year-old Japanese kid can actually beat up sailors when it should be the other way around. But whatever. I mean, it's, I guess, nationalistic pride, Japanese and all that. Whatever. Anyway, yeah. Ryo actually goes to these bars at night just searching for sailors so they can beat him up and get the information that he wants. And of course, that all leads to other things that happen later on in the story. That he goes to a harbor district where he has to meet up with some Chinese people that actually work in the harbor district. And of course, they have like more information regarding Land D, where Land D is located, how to get there. Then of course, the main character has to figure out how to get there. He wants to travel by plane, it's too expensive. No, he has to go by boat because it's like the most affordable thing he can get. That's mainly the whole gist of the story. Now, I should also point out that the game is actually split, the first game is actually split in 3 discs. So of course, the first one, you're just like running around in the main part of Yokosuka, interacting with everyone you can find, just to see if you could actually get more information from people. And of course, you have other characters to interact with. Particularly, let's say you have this hot dog vendor named Tom, this girl in the flower shop that goes by the name of Nozomi, who's a childhood friend of Ryo. Then you got Fukusan. Fukusan is like this a close friend, sort of like a brother figure that was a disciple of Ryo's dad. You get to know these characters more and more when the story progresses, and it's very intriguing. I mean, it almost plays like I guess like a soap opera in a sense. I mean, the drama itself, you get hooked in. Like, where is this thing taking me? I'm interested in these characters. What are they doing? It's like, living their daily routine. And it's actually very intriguing, having all these characters, not to mention the fact that they all have speaking lines. And every little detail is just amazing in this game. Of course, back on track, the whole storyline. By the time you're in the harbor district, you have to find a way to get a job. And of course, you actually have you actually find some ties with a friend, like in the harbor district, that actually gets you a job operating a forklift. And you're just carrying crates from one place to another. And that leads to a very weird, like, kart racing game with a bunch of forklifts. So it is kind of amusing. So, yeah, eventually it just leads to the main character, like, saving up enough money to go to Hong Kong. Because he needs to fulfill his personal mission to actually go there. He actually, has to deal with other personal things too. Like, dealing with gang wars, saving his quote-unquote love interest, which kind of irks me a little bit because it's one of those scenarios where the main character is just so oblivious that he has the girl that he knows has a crush on him but doesn't really know how to express his feelings. You're like, it's like your typical anime stuff. Like the dense male character and the female character who's just crazy about him, but she doesn't know how he feels about her, and it's just a really confusing love story. I mean, long story short, they're childhood friends. She has feelings for him. He doesn't know how to react to the whole scenario. And there are some really intriguing moments in the story because in the third disc, you actually have to save her because she was kidnapped by this huge gang. And, of course, you personally have to beat everyone up. Of course, after all that, he has to fulfill his destiny, which is going to Hong Kong directly so that he could, take care of business on his own terms. Let's back up for a moment and talk about the gameplay. I mean, the gameplay, like I said, initially starts off as like a detective game, exploring every little detail. But then there are other elements where it actually like has this this fighting game mechanic. I mean, if you're familiar with the games of Virtua Fighter, it has a similar mechanic where there's like a one button for every command, say a punch, a kick, a dodge, and a block. For the most part, those are like your main attacks, your main buttons. And of course, you have the L and R buttons, which are mainly to run. I should point out, the fighting mechanics, they work fine for the most part if it's like for a one-on-one battle in an open arena. But when it comes to a very closed arena, and you're being ganged up by like 5 or 6 fighters at the same time, maybe even more, the camera can get a little clunky at times, and yeah, it can stumble, it can somehow get in the way, it can just block your view. The original Dreamcast, the controller itself, never really had a right thumbstick. Unlike, let's say, for example, this, which is supposed to be like an Xbox 360 type controller. This is a third-party USB controller. Or like a GameCube controller where you normally see a right thumbstick. Yeah, the Dreamcast never really had a right thumbstick for some reason. So it became a little difficult to control the camera during the fights because the camera would just do whatever it wants. It'll try to follow you, then it'll try to follow an opponent. That's like one of the flaws that the game has. It's like trying to play Ocarina of Time without Z-targeting. It's just really awkward. And you can't really focus on who to attack when you got someone right behind you. That can be a little tedious at first, but you have to get used to it. Talking about the gameplay mechanics, the main gameplay mechanics actually focus on QuickTime events. Now, I should point out that some people usually associate QuickTime events to Shenmue, saying that the game originated the QuickTime events. Not exactly true. I mean, QuickTime events have existed about as early as Dragon's Lair. If you remember that old game. You know, Don Bluth animated all that. So, yeah, the QuickTime events, to me, they're a little hit and miss. Because it's one of those things where you just have to press a button in the right moment just so you can actually see the next cutscene. And sometimes you can actually, like, forget to press a button, or maybe you're just, you drop your guard, you're like immersing yourself into the story, and then all of a sudden you're forced to press the A button and the B button when you don't even have the controller in your hand, and of course you kind of miss what's supposed to happen. It can be a little frustrating. I mean, I've had my experiences with QuickTime events in other games, particularly like Resident Evil, Tomb Raider. I mean, it's intriguing, but there are some parts that just kind of annoy me a little bit. But yeah, it's the gameplay mechanics that you have to get used to in this. So it has its flaws, but it's still entertaining for what it is. And speaking of flaws, I think the main flaw that the game has, the English dubbing. Now, that's the thing. I mean, there are times where the English dubbing is fine, but there are times where it just comes off as just cringy.
I don't have no more. Please, leave me be.
Stop it! And just who are you? Don't you know that blackmail is way uncool? Thinks you stop it?
Let's say, for example, the main character, Rio. Yeah, he speaks in a very stiff and wooden manner. Well, he's knocking on the door. He's like, bum, bum. Perhaps they're out? It's like a very wooden, very robotic way of actually, saying that. The dubbing just feels so out of place with some characters that it just doesn't seem right. Like if you go to the forklift area and you meet this character called Mark, and of course he's portrayed as this like black character, and he's given us a weird, goofy voice. I mean, it's weird. It just sometimes comes off as cringy.
Good morning, everyone. Morning. On your mark, almost time to go.
The funny thing is that I know people will probably defend the dubbing in the game because it has a particular charm in its goofiness, but that's really up to you whether you like it, the English dubbing or not. That's really up to you. You can also choose to listen in the Japanese format with subtitles. That really depends on how you want to play Shenmue. Okay, the music, particularly the main theme, it's downright beautiful. What I can say about it is that just listening to it starts off very oriental. Then it starts off as like mysterious, intriguing, then almost starts to be like full of wonder and full of almost a bit of magic, I guess. The song is like one of those charms that the game has that actually sucks you into the story. You're always wondering, like, where is this thing gonna take me next? I feel like the music is also like a character in the story because it also like guides you, shows you the emotions, tells you how you should be feeling. I mean, the game itself just expresses so much. I was just overly impressed at the detail in the game. Regarding Shenmue, I do have to admit that the game really was ahead of its time. It was one of the best games ever made. Still is. It's up there, I can agree. It does have its flaws, like I pointed out, with the quick time events, the fighting game mechanics. At times they work, at times it's a little awkward. As for the gameplay exploration mechanics, they're also very intriguing. And I've actually enjoyed the experience of playing Shenmue. And, of course, I decided to play through the second one. It never was released in North America. The game was actually released in Europe, aside from Japan. It became like a PAL exclusive. And, of course, the game eventually was released through the Xbox, the Xbox Classic, that I prefer to call. So, that was like a console exclusive. And the funny thing is that the modding community is so awesome sometimes. I mean, the English dubbing that was actually used in that Xbox version was somehow converted to the Dreamcast ports. You can actually hear the English dubbing in the Dreamcast port thanks to a mod. And that's pretty impressive. That just shows the dedication to the fanbase. Now, regarding the second game, which takes place in Hong Kong, Shenmue 2 originally starts in this area called Aberdeen, which is pretty much the Hong Kong harbor. Like, right off the bat, the main character gets robbed by a bunch of thugs, accompanied by this little kid who kind of screws you over. And, of course, you have to, like, find your stuff back, your bags. And inside is, of course, one of the mirrors that the main character actually had hidden from Land D. During this whole story, very early on, you're supposed to, like, find out, like, where's your bag? What happened to the stuff? Where's the little brat that actually, like, screwed you over? You manage to find them. You beat them up. You find the kid. The kid gets your stuff back. The only drawback is that, of course, they stole your money. And the only way you can somehow, like, earn somewhat of a living is by working through part-time jobs, particularly, like, either participating in arm wrestling games, participating in fighting events, occasionally doing other gambling games like Lucky Hit, which is kind of similar to that of Plinko. If you're familiar with the Price is Right and know what Plinko is, it's very similar, but instead of like a chip or like a token, it's actually more like a ball or a bead inside like a bunch of pins, and they have to reach like a certain slot in the bottom. There are other games, other mini games like Roll It on Top, like different variations of dice games, craps. Also, this little like reverse roulette kind of game where you have to like roll a ball in the middle and have them like land on one of the symbols, one of the four symbols. There are a lot of interesting ways to actually earn money in this game. During the story, you actually like come across this character by the name of Joy, who is this redhead biker chick, and of course she knows her way around town. She actually helps you get a part-time job, gets you a place to spend the night. Of course, it's a motel, but you have to like find a way to like earn the money so you can actually pay the debt in the hotel, and of course like stay there regularly. And during that time, you have to like find more clues regarding your regarding that letter that you got in the first game. That you have to find this character named Yonda Zhu, who is somehow connected with Ryo's father and the whole backstory of the mirror. You have to find this other character called, I think, Li Xiao Tao. The whole scenario just involves Ryo finding a way to like experiment with other martial arts techniques, because in the first game he's master jujitsu. I mean, he practically says it's jujitsu that he has learned. But in this game, he has to practice wudu, I think it is. So Ryo has to learn martial arts techniques from first this woman called Li Xiao Tao, who's supposed to be like this this top master martial artist, this female martial artist of this giant temple. Ryo has to find other former masters who have retired or still practice it. Let's say, for example, like one you had to speak to a bum in a mall. Another, you had to speak to an old man who's just practicing Tai Chi in a park. And you just have to find a way to, like, dominate the different methods to Wudu. Like, trying to figure out, like, you know, how to be one with yourself, how to perfect your instincts, your fighting styles. It's a little complex. It's very profound. But, yeah, I mean, for the most part, you're preparing yourself for the big fight. And you're learning martial arts techniques, like, beyond the scope of what the character knows. During all this time, of course, he continues to find more information regarding where Yuanda Zoo is located, which eventually leads him to visiting other locations. One in particular is called Kowloon, and Kowloon was actually based off of this condensed city, this walled city that originally existed in in Hong Kong, but was later torn down years ago because of, well, it was more like safety reasons, because the whole place was just a giant condensed slum that was like this building that was about to collapse at any moment that many people usually called home. Back in Hong Kong in those days. Also, I should point out, this takes place like around 1986, 1987. The gameplay of the first and the second game. So mostly the second game takes place in 1987, during the time when Hong Kong was actually a British province. So yeah, that's very interesting how that game takes place in like the mid 80s. Yeah, by the third disc, which by the way there are 4 discs total in this in Shenmue 2. You visit through the walled city of Kowloon, and it's one of those things where it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And it's a huge city. It has pet shops, it has a kindergarten, gambling areas. It's all condensed in this walled city, this giant building that is like this rural urbanization. And there, of course, there are also a lot of drug trafficking, if you will. I mean, in real life, that's what happened. And of course, there are a lot of gang members within the game in that part of the story. So you have to find like more information regarding what these people have to do with this Yuan the Zoo character. Eventually, you actually find out this character. You come across other characters that were former gang members that were helping out, that wanted to just steal for themselves, wanted to like somehow live in Hong Kong with this crazy gang-filled scenario. I mean, not just in Kowloon, but in Aberdeen, the main Hong Kong harbor as well. So you team up with this other character called Ren, who is a bit of a jerk, but he's a somewhat likable jerk, and he somehow like helps guide you through certain parts of the game. You come across this character that is actually voiced by a woman in the English dub, but it's actually a transvestite character. And then, of course, you come across this giant, this behemoth, this 350-pound monster of a man. You can say like the final boss of this like Kowloon area. Before you actually like fight him, you have to like come across other characters, other fighters. You have to like get yourself in like these gambling rings, try to get in contact with like this bowler hat guy, like in the storyline, or he supposedly gives you like information as to like where to meet this person. So yeah, you're literally going through town, participating in these fighting tournaments, earning money, earning a living. You find a place to stay first off in a motel. Then you actually get offered other places to stay. The supporting characters actually help out the main character in trying to fulfill his mission. It's a very extensive like wild goose chase that happens during the entire, I guess, second and third part of the disc, where you're just like walking around trying to find this guy, trying to find that guy, go to the local tea shop, do this like tea sign that involves like these 4 cups, supposedly to get more, to get someone to, fulfill you in clues. I mean, there's just so much to take in the story. I mean, you just don't know like how to express it completely. By the time you like reach the end of the third disc, you find out that you have to go to a particular location. This small village called Julin, I believe. That's when the 4th disc starts, and you are taken to this small village, and you come across this young girl called Sheshua. And Sheshua is this character that has been literally like shown since the first game. And it's a character that isn't shown until like the beginning of the 4th disc of the second game. And this girl supposedly has like some connection with Rio, some spiritual connection. This Chinese girl that just lives in the village. Apparently Rio rescues the girl who was trying to save this white goat from drowning in this in a river during a heavy storm. And of course he manages to save them both. And as a sort of thank you, the girl actually takes Rio to the village during a long exposition, a few quick time events here and there. You're finally reaching the village, you get to know the girl a little more. Rio somehow finds out apparently her father was researching one of the mirrors, particularly the Phoenix mirror, which is the mirror that he has. And the Dragon mirror is what the antagonist has taken away. Rio's just trying to take it back at some point. It's kind of revealed that the 2 mirrors have something to do with like some kind of a treasure. Shenmue 2 goes from this Hong Kong kung fu action movie to something that just feels like it just came out of Indiana Jones. It just has this strange mystery, treasure finding kind of story, and it seems a little awkward after finishing the 3rd disc and going to the 4th one. by the time you actually like come across this this cave where supposedly the girl's father was supposedly living in, because it was kind of like a private area that was like for personal research. Then that's where they kind of discover this whole cave to have like more secrets than you initially thought, and it has to do with like the strange sword that was placed in there. Then it's kind of revealed that the two mirrors have something to do with it, and by the time we're about to like see what these things are supposed to be about, like what does this all mean? To be continued. No wonder people are asking for a third one. The second one ended on a cliffhanger. And it's crazy. I mean, at the point where you're just reaching this huge climax of the story, after this huge-ass hero's journey, you're gonna leave this thing in a cliffhanger ending because, well, there wasn't much funding to continue the story. It's it's hilarious just looking back at it. And this was like, I think 2001, 2002, where the second game was released. But yeah, the game is actually like so profound, so detailed, there's so immersive. There's so much content in this game that I can't even like express it all in one video alone. It's one of those things where you have to see for yourself, experience the game for yourself to actually understand it. In terms of gameplay and other things, the visuals, first off, the visuals are just wow. I mean, you can tell how incredibly detailed the second game is compared to the first. Visually, it's the graphics are comparable to that of maybe like PlayStation 2 at best. I do have to like point out one particular flaw that I've kind of noticed more in the second game than in the first game. The second game has this like rendering issue. The NPCs, the non-player characters, they have this habit of like randomly fading in and out of the scene because of, I think, hardware limitations. And I would kind of forgive that in a sense, but it can get a little distracting. Just imagine like you're walking around town, you're minding your own business, then suddenly an NPC character just fades into the screen. You're like, whoa. I mean, they kind of act like total ghosts, just like fading in and fading out of the screen. And it's all because of a rendering issue that the Dreamcast hardware, you know, it was exceeding its own limitation. That's always been like a sort of a tedious aspect more in the second game than in the first game. Also, the QuickTime events in the second game, I do have to point out that they're a little more advanced because it isn't just like pressing one button. You have to do like this dialogue combo thing where you have to press, let's say, for example, up, down, A or left, right, X to actually do like this command. Otherwise, you have to repeat the entire scenario all over again, which can be freaking tedious. When it comes to QuickTime events, there are going to be a lot of trial and error moments. It can be a bit of a nuisance, but you have to get used to it. Otherwise, you'll never progress in the game. Regarding Shenmue, I mean, I want to say like so much more about this game, but I really can't do it justice just expressing what I can, like from my own perspective of the gameplay. Personally, I think the second one is actually slightly superior than the first one in terms of gameplay because there's just more variety of things to do, aside from playing arm wrestling, participating in these little fighting events, gambling, and yes, of course, the arcades from the last game, you know, Hang On, Space Harrier, Afterburner. I mean, it's more an expansion of the first game. And it's a nice little detail to actually add the stuff from the first game in the second game as well. But man, it's just crazy to think how this game itself, like the second game in particular, has 4 discs. And the discs themselves, think of them as like 1 gigabyte each, roughly. Those are the game discs on the Dreamcast. The first game only had like 3. The second game has 4. So put that into perspective. Let's say like 700, 800 megs per disc. The first disc could be like 2.4 gigs. The second disc could be like 3.2 gigs, give or take. So yeah, it just shows how much detail like these two games have, and how so ahead of their time they were. To be honest, you know, from my personal experience, I have enjoyed playing both games, and I have considered maybe playing through them again at some point. Even if you play through them again like a second time or a third time, you're always going to miss something. Another thing I think I forgot to mention early on, there's this enhancement, this slight improvement that the second game has over the first, is that the second game actually has like a map in the bottom left corner, where the first game doesn't exactly have like a built-in map in the inventory or in the pause screen. The map in the first game, you have to like literally find it in town, like the same way you would find a map in your local mall. You know, those maps will usually say that you are here, and it shows you the other locations of the other stores. Yeah, that's pretty much like the whole gist of it in the first game, but in the second game, you actually have like an option to look for the map directly. I highly recommend you guys check out the original 2 games, please, again, support the games, the official release on Steam, on Xbox One, on PlayStation 4. And here's hoping that we check out Shenmue 3. I was initially concerned about Shenmue 3 in particular because, well, everyone has already seen the initial trailer and it's kind of criticized how wooden the characters seem to appear. But you know something? The whole wooden nature of the characters, that's kind of like the whole charm of Shenmue. They were always stiff and wooden in some way. For those who have already played Shenmue, they already know what this is all about. For the newcomers, it gets a little, hard to get invested in it. I'm a little cautiously optimistic about Shenmue. I'm sure the third installment is going to do really well. I'm just hoping that, hypothetically speaking, if a third one becomes really successful, there could be a possibility of a fourth one. I mean, there was this big picture that Yu Suzuki had, that it was going to take place like in multiple chapters, and I think there was like a good chunk of those chapters explained in the second one, and of course the third one is going to explain the other parts. Like I said, it's best that you experience this game for yourself. You're probably going to end up playing it 2, 3, 4 times. It really depends on how many times you're going to do like your Shenmue runs, because there's always going to be something you're going to miss out on. I know this review is a little mostly off the cuff, but I wanted to try something different, just express my views on the importance of Shenmue. Was it worth it? I totally enjoyed the experience. I recommend it to anyone to check it out. This is a completely different experience compared to what you normally play in open world games like Grand Theft Auto. It's like the polar opposite. The best way I can compare Shenmue with Grand Theft Auto is that Shenmue is more order, while Grand Theft Auto is more chaos. Shenmue pretty much teaches you, how to be polite with others. You have to show common manners, unlike Grand Theft Auto, which Grand Theft Auto you just have to kill and run over people, and that's not exactly the concept that Japan is trying to imply. I mean, you have to be respectful, you have to show manners, you have to be kind. So, I'm looking forward to Shenmue 3, and I recommend you guys check out the first 2, just so you can get the main picture. So, that's about it. I think I managed to get my point across, even though it's kind of all over the place. But, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll make another review later on. Something a little more compact. Thanks for watching. See ya.
How about a game of Lucky Hit? You want to try a game of Lucky Hit? How about trying Lucky Hit? You want to try a game of Lucky Hit? How about a game of Lucky Hit?